So thank you everybody for joining us today. This is our second training and webinar on financial recovery from COVID and customer assistance going forward for water and wastewater customers. And what you, yesterday we presented on customer assistance programs in detail. And today we'll be covering a little bit more on answering your questions about some of the issues that you're dealing with this. So first I want to say thank you for joining us. And my name is Shadi Eskaf. I'm the Research Director with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina. And Heather Himmelberger and myself will be covering today's session and answering your questions. Just a reminder, we think we've got you all muted, and please keep yourselves muted for this this session. The questions that we'll be answering will be probably best administered through the chat box. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box, and we will queue them for response. Many of you have already submitted questions ahead of time when you were registering for the two webinars, and we really appreciate that. We actually got quite a few questions. So Heather and I are prepared with a long list of questions that we'll be answering. But if you have any questions anyway that you haven't already submitted either yesterday during the webinar or previously when you were registering for the webinars, please submit them in the chat box and we will see them and try to answer as many questions as possible in the next hour and a half. Just a reminder that you will be receiving a certificate of completion within 30 days of today. And for water operators, they're requesting credit hours. The two sessions have been approved combined for 0.3 training credits, and you need to have attended the entire session yesterday, all 1.5 hours, and then all of today as well, and also be participating in the polls as we launched on polls today. I think we have a couple of polls. We actually have an update on the water operators credit requirements. If it's possible, if you are requesting water operator credit hours, please go to the chat box and send a private message to Allison Perch, and you should see her listed there with your, I guess your CEU or your water operator ID number. So that way we can keep a log of everybody who's requesting water operator hours and making sure that we send you the appropriate documentation. And I'll try to remember to mention that again. Heather, please remind me if I forget towards the end of the session so that we make sure everybody's covered there. If you haven't attended yesterday's session, this is your first time, then just quick introduction on who we are. We're part of the Environmental Finance Center network. And our program provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems across the United States for free at no cost to the water system, thanks to a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And we're here to answer questions and to help water systems that serve fewer than 10,000 people on anything to do with financial management of their operations. So if you, and today's session is actually perfect for that because we're literally just going to be answering your questions. And it could be anything related to customer assistance programs or anything else that's financial related to your water system. Here's a list of all the different environmental finance centers across the country. We're spread all over the United States, and we work together, we partner together with amongst the EFCs as well as other organizations that you see listed here to provide these services to you, and we appreciate the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for providing the funding for these webinars and trainings. So on that note, we'll just introduce our speakers real quick. And before we start addressing some of your questions, so Heather Himmelberger, would you please, who's the director of the Southwest EFC, please introduce yourself.
Hi again, and welcome back everybody for the second part of our webinar. And again, my name is Heather Himmelberger. I'm the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And I'm an engineer, environmental engineer with about 35 years of experience working with water and wastewater utilities at pretty much everything that you could do from design, operations, operation and management, management, finance, asset management, water loss, all those things. So I love working with water utilities, and I've been doing this job since 1994. So once I found out how interesting it was, I've just stayed with it. So I'm glad to be here today and glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, Heather. And just a little bit more about myself. I'm Shadi Esgaf. I'm a research director at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina. And I really focus a lot on water finance in general, rate setting, capital planning, regionalization, affordability, customer assistance. So I'm happy to answer any questions that relates to any of these topics. But feel free to ask your questions, and even if we don't know the answers, we'll find people who could answer those. And if you're a small system that serves fewer than 10,000 people, and you might have some detailed questions, or you might want to have more than just a quick question and answer, feel free to contact one of us, and we can provide some direct assistance where we answer a whole bunch of questions or work with you on the issues that you're dealing with. And I'll try to talk about some of the resources that the centers provide under this program that's covered by the program. And just as a quick reminder, again, this is the second session of 2, and yesterday's session was recorded and we're working on posting it online. This session is also being recorded, so we'll have both recordings posted online, and you'll be receiving an email with links to the recordings as well as the PowerPoint slides. The PowerPoint slides have already been posted on the website. We've actually combined yesterday's PowerPoint slides with today's slides into one document so that you just have one resource to look at. And with us today we have Mr. Chris McCord, who's the Deputy Director for Central Services at the Office of Drinking Water at the Washington State Department of Health. So Chris, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Great, thanks, Shadi. Everybody, I'm here to welcome you guys to the second day of the training. I want to thank each one of you for, first of all, for what you bring each day to your job in helping to protect public health, operators or utility managers. And I think, in our mission statement right now, it's about working with others to make sure there's safe and reliable water. And this past 6 months, I don't think we've ever exercised that more. And so I thank each one of you for what you bring to the front line, creating the barriers to protecting public health. A little bit about where I've been involved in the COVID response. I have spent quite a bit of time working with the governor's office and with utility stakeholders as the Proclamation 2023 has been created and then added to. Some of the things that we felt were really important was that we have opportunities like this to spend time with utilities trying to help those that have programs further develop them. And then for a lot of utilities that quite likely have not had a great exposure to developing customer assistance programs, introducing that concept. You got to remember that proclamation was written with the energy sector as well as the water and telecommunications sectors involved. And one thing that I have learned over the past 6 months is that from a standpoint of being prepared for customer assistance work, we're lagging behind. We don't have the same federal funding in the water sector that the energy sector has. And so that's why the opportunity like this to bring the network of the Environmental Finance Center partnership, it's really important, and I reflect on the proclamation. The whole purpose of that is to make sure that your customers, the residents of our state, feel safe in their homes during this COVID crisis, and knowing that they have safe water at the tap to be able to use for their families is so vitally important to that. So thank you again for that piece. From a financial standpoint, I know this hasn't been easy for utilities. Some of the projected revenue impacts that could be foreseen, and I'm continuing to collect information on that from utilities and convey that up to decision makers. That proclamation is due for a renewal or not. We don't know for sure, just in a couple of short weeks. And so I will be providing some additional information this week with the governor's staff that are working on that decision. And again, I just want to thank Heather, Shadi, your whole group. I've known Heather for almost 20 years now. I think we met in Denver 20 years ago, and she was doing some capacity development work with us. And you guys, we're just so grateful. I don't think we could have a better resource available to us. We've got some great resources and training and technical assistance here in the Northwest, and you guys have become kind of an annual visitor for us, and this is just so timely. So thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Chris, for being here today and sharing those words. We really appreciate it. And just a little bit about how the format is going to go today. Again, we had questions yesterday that were submitted. We had questions that were submitted during the registration period. So we will cover both of those today. And then there are some questions that are starting to come in today while you're on, so keep those coming in. So we've broken down the questions into categories as best we could, and you know, sometimes they might cover more than one category, but we did our best to try to group them together so that we can kind of go through the some of the questions, and I think Shadi's going to have a few words before we get started with the questions, but we'll go through the questions and do our best to answer, again, as many as we can. And we've kind of put off, if you ask a question that was very specific to one very specific type of situation, we're going to hold those kind of towards the end because we want to cover the more general questions first. If we don't get to those, we'll try to send you an answer separately for your very specific questions about your individual utilities.
Thank you, Heather, and that's kind of leads into, you know, the agenda again. We're going to just very quickly talk about some of the topics that we've heard both from you all in Washington as well as from other states where we've done these kind of trainings before. That might spur some ideas and some questions for you to submit today. But then we'll just very quickly launch into your questions. We have a few slides, but not very many, and really the slides are there to answer some of the questions that you've asked. But mostly it's going to be a Q&A, so be ready for those. So real quick, these are some of the topics that we know that systems are grappling with in general, and definitely what you're dealing with right now in Washington. Shifts in policies like the mandate from the governor to prohibit disconnections, to create a customer assistance programs, the economic conditions right now that's affecting customers and both the residential and non-residential customers. It's affecting both how they're using water, how much they're using water, how much they're being charged, and their ability to even pay. So you've got different changes, different things that are changing, both at the residential and non-residential side, and some things offset one or the other. But then there's a lot that creates a lot of uncertainty. It used to be, you know, not exactly an easy science to project what your rates need to be next year to cover your costs and to know how much water it might be sold next year. Now it's even more complicated to do that. So there's uncertainty about future projections and how you budget for the future, not knowing what's happening. And then there are a lot of questions about financial relief. So is there any kind of assistance available to help local governments or to help utilities address the loss of revenues or the delinquencies that you're accruing over time? And we'll answer some of those questions that were submitted previously, as well as changes to system operations. And there may be some other questions. So real quick, we want to ask you just right now on this call, what are some of the topics and issues that you're dealing with at your system? And if you don't work for a water system, what are some of the topics that you've either had to deal with for another system or that you've heard about? So are you dealing with substantial delinquency amounts, so the dollars, you know, those are accruing in such a high number that's creating revenue losses for you, or delayed revenues for you? Are you experiencing a lot of customers that are not able to pay their bills, or many more than they used to be? Are you trying to figure out how to design a customer assistance program? We talked about them yesterday. The proclamation requires you to create a customer assistance program and to help customers deal with, you know, their ability or inability to pay for water bills. Are you trying to struggle with that right now? Do you have significant net revenue losses because of the changing conditions? You've lost a lot of revenue from the commercial sector shutting down. If that's the case, let us know. We're just kind of curious to see what are some of the questions that you might be thinking about, even if you're not submitting them for us. Just kind of get a sense and a pulse of where you are right now in the state of Washington. And I see a good response rate. This is not a required poll, so I'm just gonna stop it here and give you a chance. This was a select all that apply, but this is, it's good to kind of show where we are right now. So I'm gonna give you another 5 seconds. Okay, thank you. So, I mean, it's all over the place. The largest response was for managing utility staff and operations safely, which makes a lot of sense with COVID, and trying to protect the health of your employees as well as your customers, and trying to, how do you do that with changing operations? But there are a lot of questions too about, there are a lot of you that are designing or figuring out customer assistance programs, and many of you are dealing with delinquencies right now, either number of customers or the amount that's in delinquencies. So thank you. So yeah, it's all over the place, which we've kind of seen from the questions that were submitted, and we appreciate you being here. So please feel free to ask any questions about any of these topics at any point in time, and we will try to answer them in the section that we're in. So with that, I think just a reminder, submit questions in the chat box, and we can get started. I mean, Heather, I think you've got the first question for me. You're muted.
Oops. Thank you. Our first set of questions is going to be related to this resumption of collections and shutoffs. There were several questions that came in related to that process. So one of the questions is, when can service suspensions resume?
Okay, thank you. So the proclamation, so you can resume suspensions technically after the expiration of the moratorium. And the moratorium right now, under current proclamation, says the moratorium will expire either at the expiration of the state of emergency or October 15th, whichever one comes first. It's likely, we're still in the state of emergency, and it's likely that that's not going to stop before October 15th. So technically, October 15th would come, and that will be the date when you can start, or after October 15th will be the date when you can resume suspensions of operations, unless there's another proclamation that extends that deadline. So as of right now, October 15th is the last day of the moratorium. October 16th onwards, you can resume suspensions. But you're also required under the proclamation to start and to create customer assistance programs to deal with and to help customers after that October 15th date. And you're not really expected, or you're expected to have customer assistance programs in place before you start resuming suspensions and cutoffs, because the whole point of the proclamation is, even after the expiration date, even after October 15th, that the utility is going to do everything that you can possibly do to avoid having to cut off customers, especially residential customers, going forward. So design your customer assistance programs, get those in place before you resume suspensions of operations.
And then the next question kind of relates to this. Are water systems allowed to accumulate late fees for delinquent accounts?
So you can, as I understand it, and unless somebody from the state will say otherwise, the proclamation says that you're not allowed to charge any kind of late fees, reconnection fees, penalties, or interest on any of the bills that were during the proclamation's prohibition of these services. So from April, I think it was April 17th, I don't remember the exact date, it was sometime in April when the first proclamation came out, through October 15th, any bill between those two dates, you're not allowed to charge any late fees, reconnection fees, interest, going forward as well. After October 15th, you're allowed to resume operations unless there's another proclamation that extends that deadline. So going forward on any bills past October 15th, you're allowed to charge late fees, but you're not allowed to charge late fees, a month from now on bills that were dated before October 15th. So I hope that makes sense. Anything that's up to October 15th, forget about charging late fees at any point, or reconnection.
Sounds like we might have lost Shadi temporarily. Shadi, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can. There was just a brief moment where you froze and we lost you, but good.
It's telling me my internet is unstable, so if that keeps coming up, I will turn off my webcam and hope that helps.
So we have a couple of questions that came in that sort of relate to the answers you've just given, so I'll or state those questions. So one is, are we still able to charge the insufficient funds on return checks? So basically somebody writes you a check, they don't have sufficient funds, and you don't have the money that they tried to pay you. And I don't know if the order, did you read anything where the order would say they couldn't charge those types of fees?
The order is really, they only have one line about late fees, reconnection, and so it doesn't really address that specific case where you're charging return check fees. I would imagine, again, I'm looking to the state here to answer this question, because and I should clarify right off the bat, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not here giving you legal advice, so be careful when you're consulting with us. I would suggest consult with your attorney. I would say under the proclamation, the spirit of proclamation, that they're trying to avoid any kind of fees that you would add on to the bill. That they want, your customer is due or is obliged to pay what their bill is, but don't add any more fees to it. So I would be hesitant if I was in your shoe. I'll be hesitant to charge a return check fee without consulting, your local government attorneys to see whether or not that's possible, and also to contact the Department of Health. There's a customer assistance program website, and there's an email address there. You can contact the Department of Health to get clarification on that. And we have them on the line right now, and it looks like, that might be a point of discussion for them as well. So thanks for bringing that question up. Great. All right, Heather, so I got a question for you. This is coming from a utility asking what the normal, how is it best to resume normal collection processes after the suspension of this moratorium? So what do you do now?
So now if you get to October 15th, and let's say that they don't put the moratorium back in place, that it does end on October 15th, you're going to want to think about not just on October 16th, everything goes back to normal the way it was prior to March. You want to think about how you can transition your customers and your utility back into some sense of what the new normal is. So you might want to consider waiving late fees, penalties, and interest charges for anyone affected by the pandemic, even a little bit longer beyond this October 15th deadline. You might want to let that go a little bit longer. You're going to want to think about extended payment plans. So think about, the order talked about 6 to 18 months. So think about how you would want to do that in your utility. What customers would get 6 months, what customers might get longer, 12 months, 18 months. Maybe you have that based on the amount of money they owe. So if they owe a certain amount, you give them more time than if they owe less. So you might want to think about those kinds of things, or the financial situation of the person. So if the person was severely impacted by COVID in some way, they lost their job, for example, and haven't been able to find another one, you might want to have, extended payment plans. So think about how you will set up that payment plan, and think about doing it in a fair and equitable manner. So what kinds of customers get different amounts of payment plans? Try to be fair about that. So if you set up a policy of who gets what amounts, that you're not telling this customer you owe $20 and so I'm going to give you 6 months, and you owe $200, but I'm only going to give you 6 months also. But somebody else who owes $200 is going to get 12 months. You don't want to do that kind of thing where you're treating customers very differently. So kind of come up with procedures that would be fair. Consider developing a list of potential sources of funds for other purposes, like, electric or healthcare, or funding towards internet. There's all kinds of government funds that are set up for all types of purposes. And if you had a list of those that maybe you could hand out to customers and say, okay, here's a list of places you can go for assistance in other bills that might allow them to pay the water bill. You might consider capping bills at a certain amount per month. And I mean capping like that payment of the back pay, not your new payment, not your new bills, but maybe we don't want anybody to have to pay more than, $30 a month on the back bill. So we'll spread out the payment plan as long as possible to keep it from being that, being higher than that. And then consider forgiving a portion of the money owed if payments are made for some specified period of time. So you could say, well, if you agree to pay this much for 9 months, we'll forgive the last 3 months of your payment or something like that. So, and if they don't pay, then you could say, well, you gave up the opportunity to have some portion of it forgiven. And then maybe consider a grace period from the end of the moratorium before the payment plan starts. So maybe you don't initiate it right away, but you send notices to everybody like, okay, now the moratorium is off. We're giving you a grace period of a month or two, but after that, normal operations resume.
Thank you, Heather. We're getting some questions about customer assistance programs. I'm going to save those questions to a little bit later. I know it kind of falls on what Heather is talking about. We want to address some questions that came in about system operations and management first. We didn't get a lot of questions on those, so we'll cover those now and then kind of move on to talking about customer assistance programs because I think that will take up the bulk of our time. So on system operations and costs and management, one question that came in was asking how are systems making up for lost time during COVID?
So I think one of the things that we want to think about is a utility has X amount of resources, money and time to do what they need to do. And it's really hard to go back into time. So whatever you didn't get done from, say, March till now, till the end of September, because you didn't have staffing or you didn't have the money to do it, that you're not going to go back and fix all that because, you know, that didn't happen. But what we really want to do is go forward from wherever we are. And this is a concept that we teach in asset management all the time, is it's really hard to change the past, but it's really easy to change the future. Or at least it's in your control to change the future. So if you look at where you are and say, okay, I need to go from where I am and go forward, the best things to do are those kinds of things that are the highest risk for your utility. So again, it's sort of an asset management concept, but it works really well in this setting. There are some assets that are going to be really high risk to you. And by high risk, that means they're likely to fail, and it's really bad if they do. There's a bad consequence. And you want to do a systematic process of kind of looking at your utility and saying, what are those high risk things? What are the things that are most likely to fail? Either an asset or a process within your utility, and which ones have a really bad consequence if they do. And those are the items that you really need to address first. So when you're kind of going back and trying to say, I'm going to make up for what didn't get done, you know, maybe some things became high risk during that period and you really need to address those. So like if you have a pump that's getting ready to fail and it's a really important pump because it supplies your raw water, you're going to want to put some effort towards that, you know, with operation and maintenance, maybe some repairs, possibly a replacement. So really look forward or look at your utility and going forward, think about the risk of your items and really address your high risk items with the available time and resources and kind of go from high to moderately high to medium and leave your low risk assets till the end so that you can really drive the risk down of your utility and try to improve things from what didn't get done during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Heather. We got a question that came into the chat today. And this might be a question that's not just for you, but maybe even for everybody in the audience. So feel free to submit some thoughts through the chat as an answer. But the question has come in saying that they're asking, this water system is looking to hire a new water distribution manager, and they're asking if there's any agency out there that's trying to promote young people to get involved with working for or running water systems. So what are some of the avenues that might be available right now to look for workplace and hiring?
I would say there's lots and lots of groups trying to do exactly what the questioner said. So for example, the American Water Works Association, the Rural Water Association, a lot of the state agencies, and I think, I don't believe Chris is on the phone anymore, Chris McCord, but I know that's near and dear to his heart, you know, as part of the operator certification for many years, or operator certification program, that he has been very concerned about how do we get young people into the business. So there are lots and lots of organizations that are trying to do exactly what the questioner said. And I'd say there's varying degrees of success of trying to convince people to get into the water business. We have a hard time getting young graduates out of, say, high school or college, or even like an associate's degree program, to understand that water is a career. So I've heard some utilities doing apprenticeship programs where they try to get high school kids or college kids to work part-time in the utility to help out and learn the business. And then I think to look for an operator, there's a couple of different approaches that you can use. One is the local section of your American Water Works Association probably has some kind of listserv. I'm on several of them around the country, not in particular Washington State, but I get the whole country's AWWA ones and plus several other states. I'm just on their listserv, and so it just comes out of like what kind of jobs people are looking for, and they'll post water operator jobs and manager jobs, and that's a good place to try to get your ad out there. And you can either post it on the national AWWA one, and AWWA is American Water Works Association, if I didn't say that before, and you can also post it in the local section of the Washington State AWWA. You might also want to contact the operator certification program at Washington State. Sometimes those folks will maintain lists of operators who are looking for work. So that might be an avenue for you to kind of consider for looking. And then I would reach out to systems in your area and ask them, how they were able to attract their operators, and see if there's something you can learn from a local utility for what they did to try to attract somebody into the utility.
Thanks, Heather. And somebody submitted an answer as well, saying that the Evergreen Rural Water has an apprentice program as well. So definitely tap into that. I think that's great that exists. There's a question about asset management, funding sources. So what are the funding sources that are available to implement required asset management technologies for maintenance and operations? So this is, again, we're not talking customer assistance here, but it's still an important question. So Heather?
So sometimes you can use the state revolving fund and roll it into a bigger project that you're trying to do. And sometimes the state revolving fund will fund asset management just as its own project. And sometimes the community development block grant is another place you can go. Some of those programs will allow you to do it. But if you don't have either of those sources of funding, there are free resources. And I'll ask Shadi to put up the asset management switchboard slide. We created this website called the Asset Management Switchboard, and we collected all the free resources that we could find across the country. We worked with EPA on this. So this is not just our resources, this is anything we could find, and we're always looking to expand it. So if there's anybody who has free things that are available for asset management, tools, webinars, resources, whatever it might be, we're collecting them and putting them on this website, and you just click the topic you're interested in, the 5 topics around the wheel there. You can click on those and all the resources on those topics will come up, and there's ways to search for what you're looking for, the types of topics. So there is a lot of guidance there. And then if you go to the next slide that has our website, the Southwest EFC, we have lots of tools and resources as well for asset management. So one of the ones you see on the slide on the bottom left-hand side that says AM Can Work is a guidebook we made back in 2011. It's still relevant today because asset management hasn't changed, and it has lots of video clips of different utility personnel talking about asset management, as well as kind of a step-by-step how-to guide to do asset management. So you can take it on yourself if you would like, and it's really best done anyway by the people who know the most about their utility. So there are resources out there that can help you. And then in terms of purchasing some kind of product, there are lots and lots of products on the market. They're usually called computerized maintenance management systems, or CMMS systems, or sometimes they just call them asset management software. Be a little cautious. It does not mean it will do everything for you. You still have to be actively participating and running your utility. It's a computerized tool to help you manage your data. And there are lots and lots and lots of computerized tools out there. EPA is no longer going to support their free one. If you've heard of CUPS, the checkup program for small systems that used to be on EPA's website and free, they're no longer supporting that. So that's probably not the best direction to go. But there are lots of products. We recently checked out ones at the lower end of the pay scale, and there are quite a few now companies that have products that are more in the low thousand end, like, you know, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 end. There weren't a lot of those before. So if you're looking for something that's fairly inexpensive, you know, there are products out there, and then there's all, you know, all kinds of levels of sophistication and payment above that. So I think there's a lot of options out there for people who want to take on asset management.
Thanks, Heather. I think we'll, I'm going to skip one question and save it for later. So if we don't cover all the questions that have been submitted, please feel free to follow up with us, and we'll try to reach out to you as well to make sure that we've addressed your questions. But feel free to reach out to us afterwards as well. But just to kind of wrap this section up, there's a question that was kind of asking about how small systems are dealing with COVID right now, especially when it comes to coping with the decrease in revenues. If the pandemic and proclamation, well, during this pandemic and proclamation, but then what happens if the proclamation continues on through to next year and you're still required to avoid disconnections? You know, what do you do about lost revenue or delayed revenues?
Yeah, so this is going to be a really tough issue for all systems, and there's no one way to address the prospect of having a really big decrease in revenue. And depending on how long this pandemic continues in the manner it is right now, the revenue situation could get much worse or it could stabilize. We're not really sure. We kind of just have to watch and see what's going to happen. And there's no one way for every utility to address it. We're going to have to be looking at things, you know, on a system by system basis. One thing some systems are doing is putting off projects that they had planned. So, you know, maybe a major replacement or rehabilitation project, we're not going to be able to do that. We're going to have to put that off. But be really cautious about what you put off, that you have a plan for not having some major consequential thing happen. So maybe you were thinking about replacing a bunch of pipe, but you're going to repair it instead. But if, you know, we go back to that pump example, we have that pump that's going to fail and nobody's going to have water. That's probably not something you can put off. So you really need to be very, very careful about which projects you're putting off and which ones you're doing. And if you have reserve funds, some people have set aside emergency reserves or repair replacement reserves. If you have those, now is the time to use them. I mean, this is the definition of an emergency situation. So you might want to think about pulling those, some of those reserve funds out and, you know, again, using your highest needs for funding and putting off what you can without causing a problem. And then you want to track your revenue losses so you can figure out what has been happening to you so that you can look at the future and kind of project what might be happening. And there also may be funds, who knows, if Congress changes or something happens, you know, maybe there'll be funds forthcoming directly to water utilities to kind of fill in some of these gaps. I mean, certainly don't expect it, but if it does happen, you'll want to know what your revenue losses are so that when and if money comes, then you can reach out and say, well, this is exactly what we lost, and then they'll help you out there. And Shadi, do you want to talk about shifting the payment for capital projects?
Yeah, well, before that too, I would say that one of the resources, and towards the end of this session, we're going to show, maybe in the last 5 minutes, some of the resources that are available from the Environmental Finance Center network that helps small water systems. And one of the tools that we have available is an online dashboard that you can just use to put in some information, some financial information that will allow you to project how long you can continue to pay for operations and maintenance and debt service using your current revenues, even if they are reduced revenues, and your reserves. So how long can you sustain operations before you start really, start looking at that you won't get into the red. So it's a really simple tool to use, and I'll show you a link to it and what it looks like towards the end of it. So that's one way. The other way is that you can contact us. We actually have a separate tool that it's called the revenue loss calculator. And we actually project for a water system the next 12 to 24 months under different scenarios. So what happens if the proclamation is extended? What happens if commercial sector just never comes back to what it used to be before COVID? So we could apply some of these scenarios and help you project what those effects will be on your revenues so that you could it could inform your revenue projections and your rate setting going forward. So if that is of interest to you as a small water system, you'll see in every slide that I have what the questions are. You can request technical assistance, click on that link and contact us, and we'll get in touch with you and schedule a time to talk, to go through this. But the other addition to all the things that Heather just said was, right now the interest rates are actually relatively low, quite low in some cases. And there might be opportunities for you to consider, instead of paying for some projects that you had considered doing upfront using reserves, maybe it's a good time right now to consider doing debt service and reaching out to the SRF program, USDA, some of the other funding sources, and trying to take advantage of the low interest loans that they might have available right now and help offset, instead of having to pay upfront in cash for some of the projects, even if they're small projects, look towards loans to extend the payments and also to take advantage of low interest. So that way you're saving some of your cash now to use in this short-term period. So consider kind of shifting how you fund projects that are imminent, they're about to start as well. There was one addition to a response that you gave, Heather, which is there's $40,000 available from the SRF program, the State Revolving Fund program, for asset management. So if you are looking for funds to pay for asset management, I'm guessing that's planning, look towards the Drinking Water SRF program and see if you can apply for some of that $40,000. So thanks for that clarification, everybody.
Yeah, and one caution that I want to give everybody is when you go down that path, or if you choose to go down that path and you get money, don't just turn that development of an asset management program over to somebody else. Stay involved. It's super, super important that your utility itself be thoroughly involved in the process of, you can ask somebody to help you set up the computer program or help you get mapping data or whatever, but stay involved. Don't just walk away and hands off, because you won't get out of it what you want to. It sounds simple, but then it doesn't pay off at the end. You'll have a program that you don't understand and you can't implement. So keep yourself very tightly involved in the asset management program as you're developing it.
Thank you. So let's move on to talking about customer assistance. And this is a follow-on from yesterday's presentation. I've actually got just a couple of more slides that I didn't get to yesterday, I think might address some of the questions that have been submitted previously. So I'll go through a couple of those slides right now, and then we can start the questions, Heather.
Okay.
So under customer assistance, again, the proclamation requires all water systems to create customer assistance programs now and try to help customers even after October 15th, if that is the date. But after you resume suspension of operation or of connections, you need the customer assistance program to help customers. There's so many different ways to provide assistance, and customer assistance program can include any of these or all of these, whatever works for you and your customers. There's not a prescribed, this is the one thing that you need to create. And what I didn't mention yesterday is that under the, with the proclamations that have come out of the 8 versions, after all the extensions, there have been some amendments along the way, and there was 4 or 5 of them that talk about creating customer support programs, is what they were calling them. And those proclamations had links to attached guidance documents. And every month every new proclamation or extension, there was a slight amendment to the customer support program guidance. So the latest version is what I'm linking for you here. So when you download these slides later on, you'll have the link to the latest version, which was attached to 2023.7. And it's a guidance document that was created to explain what is a customer support program that would meet the proclamation requirements. And it talks about different options that you have, and they suggest options. The suggested options for water utilities are bill arrearage forgiveness, so forgiving them for portion or all of the bill. Payment plans, where shutoffs don't occur if customers keep up with their payment plan, or a combination of the above. That's not it though. Those are just suggestions, and you could do more, or you can do something different, or you can do one of these if that's all that you want to do. So you're given a lot of leniency and a lot of flexibility as far as designing what you want to design. But this is kind of what's in the guidance document right now. And then a couple more slides. Sorry, Heather. I said 2. I meant 4. So one question that came up was about using CDBG. I mentioned yesterday briefly that you can use CDBG funds to fund customer assistance programs that allow that basically helps customers pay their bills. So a customer would go to an agency, whether that's the utility or a partner like United Way or Community Assistance, I think it's the center. If they go to an organization that helps customers or residents pay their rents as well as the utility bills, you could use CDBG funds to provide some extra funding for that program so that there's more money available for residents to pay their water bill as well as everything else. For the Washington State's CDBG, there's a link here again with a specific guidance document. If you go to the Washington Department of Health's webpage on customer assistance programs, there's a link to this document. And it explains how you could use CDBG to offset or to help supplement some of the funds for this program. A couple of things to keep in mind. This is not going to be for local governments that could receive or are entitled to receive entitlement funds from CDBG. So if you're an urban area that receives entitlement money from CDBG, this isn't for you. This is a program that's really meant for rural areas and places that don't have those entitlement CDBG funds. And the funds will provide grants to the local governments or their partners to administer. But the money goes, instead of to the customer, they don't cut a check to the customer to pay off their bill. They cut a check to the utility to pay off their bill. So the money will eventually come straight to you being administered through these programs. And there are very specific criteria about eligibility for a resident to be able to access money from the bill paying assistance that's being funded by CDBG. So you'd have to take a look at this document to see whether or not your program supports this or would need to extend or to clarify some of the eligibility for this. Here's an example of a bill paying customer assistance program that comes from a small system. So the city of Sumner, Washington, is using $60,000 from the CARES Act funding, not the CDBG, but the CARES Act funding is supplementing this program. It's called Sumner Cares. And they're partnering with 2 organizations to administer, 2 nonprofits locally to administer it. So a customer wouldn't come to City of Sumner to pay off their bills or to ask for assistance. They would go to one of the 2 partners, and the 2 partners would go through the application process and check for eligibility and then help pay that customer's utility bill through this program. The eligibility is that you need to be affected by COVID-19. Again, any customer assistance program that's trying to meet the proclamation's requirements needs to help any customer that's affected by COVID-19. So it doesn't matter what the income level is of that customer. If anybody is suffering because of COVID-19, then they should be eligible for any of the customer assistance programs you provide. And they do have some income thresholds and within the service area, so you need to be a customer of the utility. And then the application is basically you email or you call them. So it's a very simple program. Some others are a little bit more in depth, and they have websites where you have to apply online. And they also offer payment plans. This shows you a range of different kind of bill paying customer assistance programs. So we talked about Sumner. But if you look at different examples, you can see that there's no no bill paying customer assistance program that's alike across the state. They're pretty varied. Some of the eligibility criteria varies based on what the program was designed to assist in the first place before COVID, and then when you add in COVID, they've expanded that eligibility to include anybody who's affected by COVID. But you can see that there's some eligibility that's based on poverty levels or income levels or average median income levels, and you have to be below a specific threshold there. Or the City of Spokane is different. It's not looking at income. It's more of if you've not been shut off in the past 12 months, then you're eligible. So if you've been a customer in good standing and you just need help right now, we're going to help you through this program. Then you've got funding sources comes from all over the place. Most of them come from donations, or at least use some donations. City of Spokane is using their own funds to match the donations. And City of Sumner is using some of the CARES Act funding. And then City of Lacey is using some of that CGBG. So you can see the different approaches for funding these programs. And then the last thing, I need to move my webcam, is that the assistance can either be a one-time, could be a two-time, could be up to a certain dollar amount, or it could be for the full bill amount. That really does vary. If you use CDBG, there are some specific minimums and maximums that you'd have to make sure that you match. So these are some of the examples, and now I think we'll go into some of the questions that you have. I'm going to stop sharing screen here so that we can just talk.
Okay, so Shadi, we had a question come in. It's my understanding that the program is not required for systems under 1,000 connections. Is this true? So if you could explain any issues related to systems that are under 1,000 connections, that would be helpful.
So I can understand why that question, why it was confusing, because I mentioned that with each of the proclamations, there were attachments to guidance documents from the state that would explain what would go into a customer support program. And each one of them was a little bit different than the one before. And one out of the four of them mentioned that only water systems that have more than 1,000 customers need to create customer assistance programs. But the latest version doesn't say that. The latest one says all water systems in the state of Washington would need to create a customer assistance program, as well as the frequently asked questions document that's posted by the Department of Health also says all water systems need to create customer assistance programs. So I would say always check the customer assistance program webpage that's on the DOH's website, because they update the frequently asked questions there based on new guidance and developments that are happening in the state. So check that page and look for the latest information there. So as of right now, it's all water systems that need to create CAPs. And it could be something as simple as we will just work with our customers one-on-one. If somebody's having an issue or having a difficult time, they will contact us and we will work with them one-on-one, creating a payment plan that works for them. And that's okay, that meets the requirements, as long as you're able to communicate with all of your customers that if you are having a difficult time paying your bill and you're affected by COVID, contact us and we will work with you on some other program so that you don't get cut off from water. So that's the main thing. So even small systems should be able to offer that, or are required to offer that.
And I think you answered this question already, Shadi, but one question came in, is it mandatory for water districts to provide assistance? And I think just to clarify that it covers everybody.
Yes, it's districts, municipalities, counties, even regulated water systems. And if you are regulated by the WUTC, there's going to be specific requirements and guidance that comes from them that explains what's required for the customer assistance programs. But all water systems are required to create them.
And then related question, how long are districts giving customers to pay the overdue balances?
So that varies quite a bit. And in the guidance document from the states, it mentions or suggests 6 to 18 months being the range that you could offer. We've seen from websites that they do vary. Most of them do offer at least a 6-month plan. A lot of them offer more than that. There's been at least one, and this actually was a follow-on to a question or something I mentioned yesterday, where I showed one example where there was, I think, either 90 days or 4 months, and that's the Columbia example. That was because that program was created before COVID. So in order to be to meet the COVID proclamation requirements, they would need to extend that to be 6 months. At least to follow the guidance documents. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you whether the guidance document is some kind of a legal obligation for utilities to definitely offer 6 months or more, or if it's just a suggestion and an encouragement to offer 6 months. And as long as you offer something, it should be legally okay. So I'm not sure whether you could offer anything less than 6 months. I would say definitely aim for 6 or higher, just to be on the safe side, and also because that is, it's going to be helpful for your customers to offer them longer payment plans to be able to pay off those balances.
Okay, and this is a question related to smaller systems. With smaller systems, will payment plans address the requirements of a customer assistance program?
Yes. I mean, you could offer it for a small system. You can have a payment plan. You can offer any of the options that we talked about, whether it's extensions, payment plans going forwards, bill forgiveness if you want to reduce their bill. You want to combine a few of those together. You do a payment plan and then you forgive portion of the bill towards the end. Any of those options, a bill paying, customer assistance program, all those options are valid for small systems. The easiest thing really for a very small system, if you only have a few hundred customers, is to tell them that we'll work with you one-on-one when you have an issue. Just contact us and we'll work with you, and make sure that that is clear for all of your customers, not just individual customers. All right, so Heather, I think I've got a question for you. I'm gonna skip this one, but I'm gonna ask you the next one, which is, can a house be liened when homeowner doesn't communicate or even make a partial payment? Is it an acceptable measure to place a lien on property during this pandemic or as we're collecting payments going forward?
Okay, so one part of that question I'll address first is whether it's, reasonable or acceptable during the pandemic, and that's really a question for the utility to decide. And I think it's an important question for whatever your utility governing body is, whether that's a city council or county commission or a board of directors or a homeowner board, anything, whatever that governing body is, to really wrestle with this question and for you to decide as a utility whether it's something you want to do or not. If it's the situation where you're going to put a lien on the house and you're not going to shut them off, maybe in some ways that's better because at least they have water. But there are ramifications for having liens on properties. So you might want to really be cautious about, putting liens on. But if you have situations where the customer is not communicating with you and you're trying to reach out, you're working very, very hard on trying to get the customer to pay and they just won't, you first of all want to make sure that you document how you've communicated with those customers, not just in a verbal manner, but in a written manner. For example, did you send them letters and maybe they're registered or certified to prove that the entity actually received it? Do you have any emails back and forth from you if that's the way you're communicating? So whatever you're doing, make sure you communicate in a written format, not just a verbal one, so you can show that you tried everything in your power to get the person to pay and you're just not getting anywhere. So one possibility is, and I've heard this in other utilities, where a landlord-tenant situation can be very problematic. So sometimes either the customer who lives in the house isn't paying and the landlord doesn't know, or vice versa, the landlord is supposed to pay and isn't, and the tenant doesn't know. So in addition to some of the other things you're doing, you want to make sure you have documentation on the home itself so that you've put some sort of notice on the door or something like that where the people who live there can know what's going on, just in case it's a landlord situation and the tenant isn't aware of it. You want to try that kind of thing. And, consider other options if you have any to not shutting off. So maybe the flow restrictors we talked about yesterday, really trying to do the customer payment plan. So try everything in your power to stop short of this, but if you have to, you have to. But just make sure you apply the process fairly and equitably, that you're not making differences to one type of customer versus another, or one part of the community or another. You want to make sure that you are being fair and equitable. And then Shadi, do you want to talk about the MRSC tool that they can use?
Yeah, so speaking about owners versus tenants, there are some specific rules about whether or not you could place a lien on property. And again, also depending whether you're a municipality or county or a district, the rules are a little bit different. So MRSC has a really great tool online that will walk you through a set of questions asking you, what kind of water system are you, who's late on their bill, who owns the account, how much have you communicated with them. So it will ask you a series of questions, and at the end of those questions, it will tell you whether or not you're legally allowed to place a lien on property or not. So it's a really great tool. I would say, I think if you just Google MRSC lien tool, I think you might be able to find it. If not, if you can't find it, feel free to contact us or contact me, and I can find the link for you as well. But I thought that tool is very, very helpful as far as answering that question, whether or not you can in the first place. But then everything else Heather said, even though you can or you're allowed to, doesn't mean that you should right away do that. Like, you should try some of these other things first before you get to that point. And that's the whole point of the proclamation, is asking you to do customer assistance first before you get to that point.
Okay, Shadi, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what if we haven't yet developed a customer assistance program using CARES Act funding, but here we are at the end of September and the money's going to run out in December. So do we have time to actually develop a program using this CARES Act funding at this point?
Okay, so that I think was a really great question. I think the answer there is, it depends if you already have a bill paying customer assistance program that you can partner with. Now again, you're still required to create some kind of a customer assistance program, and that could be payment plans, and that should suffice when it comes to the proclamation. But if you're trying to use or trying to create a customer assistance program to help customers pay their bills or pay off their bills, then looking for sources of funding to pay for that will be helpful. And donations is the most common way of doing it. Sometimes you could use utility revenues. Sometimes you could do things like bill roundups. Those are programs that you could try to take charge of, and there's no expiration date on that. What does expire is the CARES Act funds, which has a deadline of December that you need to be reimbursed. And I don't know whether or not you actually have an intermediate deadline where you need to submit your reimbursements to the Department of Commerce even before December, so that they can process everything before the end of December. So there may be even like a November deadline that I don't know of. But really, CARES Act funding expires in December unless Congress extends it. And right now, it doesn't look like that might happen anytime soon, unless they have a discussion about it. They're kind of working on other things right now. So with CARES Act funding expiring in December, if you don't already have a bill-paying customer assistance program and you're trying to create one, and you're going to try to use CARES Act funds to pay for that, it's going to be a tall order to try to get everything done, because you got to figure out how to administer the program, how are you going to determine eligibility, who's going to take care of communicating the program to all of the customers and administering the funds. Whether or not you have time to apply right now to get the funds in so that you administer the program yourself, or to partner with the system to administer, might be a little bit tough. If, however, there is a bill-paying customer assistance program in your area that is either for the county or the region, or that already exists to help customers or to help residents pay for rent or other utility bills, you could maybe approach them and say, if anybody comes from this area that happens to be our water customer, then could you also use those funds that you currently have to pay for the water bills, include that as part of the eligibility, and then apply for CARES Act funds to supplement the funds for that program. So if a program already exists, then you might have time right now to go and get some CARES Act funds to put into that program. But the money, again, needs to be spent before the end of December. So it's going to be kind of hard to try to do that all right now.
Okay, we have another question that came in that's related to transitional efforts. So this particular utility was starting to let the customers know prior to October 15th, so in the last few months, that the moratorium would end October 15th, and maybe letting them know that they started that they will be starting to perhaps perform shutoffs and assess late fees after October 15th. So they're asking if this will allow them to count as transitional efforts, and whether or not they can resume shutting off in October, like say the 16th, or from the 16th to the 31st, or if they have to wait till November or some other time frames. So if you could just talk a little bit about having done some efforts already and what that means going forward.
So transitional assistance is great, and everything that was mentioned, good options. But I think that the proclamation is really kind of expecting you to offer customer assistance to customers even after the October 15th deadline. So whether it's transitional or it becomes permanent after that date, you need to provide those services going forward to help customers pay their bills and to avoid being cut off after October 15th. And you need to communicate. So that is one of the requirements, is that you need to communicate these programs to your customers ahead of any kind of suspension of service. So it's good to start doing that now and to develop the programs now and to get people sign up and join these interim programs or transitional programs, whatever you want to call them. And then have a plan for extending that going forward and communicating going forward. Communication is key. I think you definitely have to do it on your website if you have a website, but as well as, consider things like door hangers, bill inserts, using local media, letting your community help groups kind of know about the programs that you're offering. So spread the word so you can try to make sure you minimize it. As far as the date, so the proclamation, the moratorium as of right now, the moratorium would end October 15th. So technically you're allowed to start suspensions after that. So starting October 16th, as long as you have customer assistance programs in place and you've given the customer a chance to sign up and to participate on those programs to avoid being cut off. So I don't know whether or not, you could start cutting off people literally on October 16th, because, have you actually covered all of the things that you had to do as far as customer support and customer assistance ahead of time before that date? And then what I was talking about yesterday was that for some systems, they're saying, all right, we're not going to cut off people because of bills that were through October 15th. We're cutting off customers that will not pay their bills going forward, so bills after October 15th. By the time you send a new bill out, that's like October 30th, and by the time that bill becomes late, which might be 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the afterwards, and then by the time they become eligible for being cut off, by the time you actually go cut off somebody because they haven't paid a bill that was dated after October 15th, it's going to be sometime in November, December. So there's already, given it's built in some time for you to really talk about customer assistance programs and to get people to join those programs before you start cutting people off. So that might be a good approach, to not cut off any customers based on previous bills, but going forward on bills after October 15th. All right, so I think, Heather, you got the next question. How do we provide financial assistance when our customers or patrons are billed yearly through the county treasurer, for example?
So this is something that we wanted to talk a little bit about of, do you have an option to get away from a yearly bill? Because that can be problematic for a customer to kind of go a whole year without realizing how much water they're using or how much that's going to cost. And it can be a real hardship. We worked with utilities in the past who've had quarterly billing and semi-annual bills. I haven't had so many customers that have this situation where they're just annual. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is allow that customer to get a more frequent bill or to pay more frequently on the bill. So a couple of options you might have is consider whether you could potentially bill them monthly or even quarterly as opposed to once a year, because that might provide a real hardship for your customers. And you might need to work with your county folks to see if that is possible. Another possibility is something that some utilities use where you can set a monthly payment amount. In fact, our utility that I live in now allows this, where you can pick a monthly amount that's sort of an average of your water use for a whole year. And they say, okay, if you paid, let's say $60 a month, every month you would cover last year's bill. And that would mean that instead of in the summer, maybe my bill's 110, and then maybe in the winter my bill's 30 because I use less water in the winter than the summer, that would smooth out that payment and allow you to budget better. So you might want to think about that. Is there any way to operate some kind of a budget payment plan where instead of waiting the year, maybe they can pay throughout the year, so that it would help you revenue wise and maybe help them better budget. And then if they pay too much, that could be applied to the next year's bill. If they pay too little, again, you can adjust it in the next year's bill and make them pay a little bit more. So kind of looking at those sorts of options. And then, see if you have what kind of customer assistance programs you have in the area, and can you work with any of those assistance programs to offer assistance to customers. And again, you might need to work with the county treasurer's office to see if any of those can kind of work together with the county treasurer's office to, help assist those customers.
I think as long as you also communicate with the county about all the different programs that are available that could be tapped into would be kind of important, so that they know what to do when customers are not paying their full bills as well. Thanks, Heather.
Sure. So we're now going to look a little bit at bill forgiveness. So somebody asks can we just forgive bills, or would that become a gift of public funds which might not be allowable in the state? So could you just talk a little bit more about whether or not you can just forgive bills?
Okay. And again, I'll start off by saying I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving you any legal advice here, but I'll do my best as far as sharing information that I've found from other people who might have interpreted it correctly. And we'll look towards the state here for any kind of assistance or clarifications. But citing from MRSC specifically, they've got a document that talks about this, and they say that the Washington State Constitution prohibits gifts of public funds except for the necessary support of the poor and infirm. So that's in the Constitution. They are allowed to use public funds to support the poor and infirm, which have been interpreted by the courts to mean the poor or infirm. And since the beginning of the pandemic, the AG's office actually has has put forward some clarifications regarding COVID, regarding public funds to support people who've been affected by COVID, saying that is allowable, that counts. I think that I'm going to quote, the memo is clarifying that the public funds may be spent for the primary purpose of protecting and promoting public health, which may have been incidental benefit on private citizens entities. So it explains that you can do this. And the guidance documents that's come from the state that explains customer support programs also says clearly that you could offer bill arrearage forgiveness. So if the state is telling you from the document that you could do bill forgiveness, then I think they've given you that permission. So all in all is yes, you can do that. You can forgive bills for those who have been affected by COVID. So that might be the key part here, because again, the interpretation or the guidance that the AG's office provided early during COVID was that you can use public funds to help people who've been affected by COVID. And the customer assistance programs that are required by the proclamation are those for people who've been affected by COVID. So as long as you're using bill forgiveness as a way to help customers who've been affected by COVID, to help them keep their water system active, or keep their water service active so they can wash their hands at home and be safe at home, then I think that yes, you're allowed to do all of this. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so please consult with your legal attorney if you have any more questions about this. All right, Heather, question for you. And just a quick check on time. I think we might want to ask one more question on customer assistance and then move on towards financial relief. So let's ask the question about, can multiple water systems work together to form and fund a regional customer assistance program?
So I think the really important concept here is what work together means, because work together can mean a lot of things. So it doesn't have to be that you guys combine your funds, which might be super difficult, and have one fund that funds water customers from all over the place, although that is a possibility. But one of the ways that you can work together that you don't want to ignore is working together to set up similar types of assistance programs at each of your utilities. So if you, let's say you get 5 utilities that want to work together and you meet via Zoom or some other way, and you say, well, we all want to have a customer assistance program that comes from donations, and we're going to set it up this way. You can all work together and share information, and it can be super helpful to have others who are going through the same thing you are. So think about ways that you can work with other systems short of combining your funds and administering them for multiple systems, because that might get really complicated. But it is possible if you had some maybe third party, like a nonprofit or something like that, where maybe you could all input money into it and have it be dispersed to your customers, but it just might be a slightly more complicated. But certainly look to your fellow utilities, especially of the same size and type as you and the same geographic region as you, and work together, because why reinvent the wheel with every one of your systems? Work together and try to come up with approaches that will work, and you each can do research, or you can do research that will benefit each of you instead of everybody having to do it separately. So really think about the ways that you can work with other utilities in creative ways and ways that can help you really improve the situation.
And I would say I haven't seen anything that would prohibit you from combining your funds to create a bill paying assistance program or other kinds of assistance programs, as long as your customers have access to that program. So as long as everybody's customers could access the program, I don't see why not. There's nothing in the guidance document that will prohibit it. I think it's a great idea if you could do it. And a lot of the bill paying customer assistance programs run by third parties, like Heather was saying, already kind of operate at that on that premise, that they're not there to administer just that one utility's customer assistance program. They're providing assistance to anybody in, the resident of the county or the resident of the region. And depending on who is their utility provider, the assistance will go to that particular utility, but they're really there to help residents of the community as opposed to your specific customers. But that is still fine. That would still count towards providing assistance to your customers. I'll just summarize one thing real quick that came in as a question earlier, which is, if you're working for the local health department, how can local health regulators assist customers or call to complain that their water has been shut off? What can they do about it? So that's important to know. I think that the local health department needs to, first of all, let customers know to contact the utility first and foremost. If they haven't already called the utility, they should do that. They need to know, the customers need to know that utilities need to offer customer assistance programs before they get cut off from service. If the utility had already done everything they could to communicate with the customer, and the customer just refused to partake in any of the customer assistance programs, or just ignored all the communications, then the utility is in their rights to cut off service at that point. But really, it's the local health regulators should let the customer know, contact your utility, talk about customer assistance programs. They can probably put you onto a customer assistance program and bring you back connected online. The other thing to know is that the Department of Health has an email address that allows customers to email the state to ask or to talk about customer assistance programs or what's happening on their service and their utility. So they could contact the Department of Health, so you can direct them that way. And then the last thing is the DOH actually has a really good FAQ geared towards water customers that explains what their rights are and what the customer assistance programs are and what should they do if they get cut off. So local health regulators, I would say, look at the DOH website or point the people who are contacting you to that website. That guidance document, the FAQ, is towards the end of the page, but it's a good resource to communicate with those residents as well. So I think we'll stop here on customer assistance programs. I know there are more questions than we can answer at this time, but feel free to reach out to us later on if you have more questions. But I'd like to kind of finish up or round up by going into financial relief. And is there some support available to help us deal with lost revenue? So I think I'm sharing my screen. Hope I am.
Yes.
Just to give you a quick snapshot. On the federal side, the stimulus bills that have come out, first was CARES Act, well, not first, one of them was CARES Act, and that's the biggest one that's helping state and local governments. It was really meant or designed to help local and state governments get reimbursed for the cost of dealing with COVID, but it was not designed to offset lost revenues or lost taxes. So it's really there to offset the additional expenses to deal with COVID. So you can't use that for recovering your lost revenues because customers are using less water. The payroll protection plan was there to help small businesses, non-governmental systems, but small businesses that access or that provide water could use that to protect their employees. But really, again, it's not there to reimburse for lost revenue. CDBG and also the Washington Disaster Cash Assistance Program, both are providing funds right now to help customers pay their bills when they can't pay their bills. So, and you can use CARES Act funding for the same thing. So really the financial support right now is available from the federal level as well as the state level is really geared more towards customers paying their bills as opposed to local governments or utilities being compensated for lost revenue because of changes in water consumption. And I think that's where things stand right now. As far as going forward, there have been discussions in the past and still going forward. There are a lot of groups that are advocating for the utilities and asking Congress and asking the states to provide some kind of stimulus funds to offset lost revenues. But the focus right now has been much more on, even in Congress, going forward, is more on bills, on helping customers pay off their bills. Which, don't forget, that is a massive support for customers, because if you've been dealing with arrearages and customers being delinquent and not paying their bills, and those bills are really substantial and they can't afford to pay those bills now, even with customer assistance programs, having these funds available to offset or to help residents pay their bills creates or brings back the revenues to the utility that's been due and hasn't been paid yet. So it is a support system, but it's really focused on the residents and the customer side more so than the utility side. But there's a lot of advocacy and a lot of push towards getting utilities compensated. It's just at the moment, it doesn't look very likely to happen anytime soon, maybe going forward. But at the moment, I would not plan on assuming there's any kind of funding that's going to come and help offset lost revenues. So you have to deal with lost revenues in some other way. And customer assistance programs will be helpful. And then again, look to funding programs because again, they've got low interest loans right now that might be very, very helpful. So let's jump into the questions related to financial relief. And I think the first one, I think we answered the first one already. Is that right, Heather?
I think so. One last point I want to make is there are some states like California is a big one that's trying to really impact the federal government to try to get relief to water utilities. And they're a state to watch for one other reason. It was a question that somebody else brought up is, what if you don't want to shut people off? Like, what if you choose to go forward, like we talked about yesterday, and say, I don't really want to resume shutoffs. We haven't done them. Could we do other things? California passed a human right to water legislation a number of years ago. They're still sort of figuring out what that actually means, but for the most part, they would like to eventually ensure that all customers always have water. So as they go forward with that legislation, they're trying to set up funding, they're trying to do a lot of things. Keep your eyes on California and what they come up with, because they might be doing some innovative things in the next, several years on how to address getting the payments that the customers owe you without having to do it through a shutoff scenario. So keep your eyes on California because, again, their moratorium lasts till 2021 at a minimum. So, it's highly likely that they're really going to have to come up with some solutions that don't involve shutoffs to get customers to pay. So again, just keep your eyes on them. There might be some good ideas coming out of that.
Okay, I think we've talked about the CDBG funds already. Oh, there was a question. Sorry, I'll just take this one if that's okay.
Sure.
There was a question about CDBG funds and using those funds to help customers, and how long can we use those funds? Are those funds available after the pandemic, or are they just for this particular situation? So the CDBG funds that I'm talking about to pay for bill paying customer assistance programs is really meant to help customers dealing with the effects of the pandemic. So it's geared towards that, but they don't expire in December like the CARES Act funds do. They actually have a little bit longer to be spent. And I think that the guidance document that I mentioned that's on the DOH's website explains it. I'm quoting from there. It says that the CDBG funds can cover eligible costs incurred as of March 27, 2020, which is when the CARES Act began, until the CDBG contract end date sometime in 2021, which is to be determined. So you can use CDBG funds to help customers pay their bills even after December through the bill paying programs, through the point when those funds are going to be either rescinded or expired sometime in 2021. We don't know what the date is right now, so I'm assuming that will be updated on the website as well. And I
would
think
suggest we spend the last 2 minutes just answering one last question that I think our smaller systems might be really interested in, is like some common hiccups that might occur for small systems. So we'll just spend the last couple minutes here just going over that question. And I think we both have some thoughts in this area for, really making sure that the program that you set up is one that your whole utility is aware of, that everybody from the top to the bottom knows what it is, so that they can communicate clearly and there's not mixed messages about what you're going to do, that your board or governing body or whatever you have who's the decision-making body sets up policies and procedures that you can all follow, so that all the customers are treated fairly and equitably. You don't want a situation where one type of customer or one customer gets one benefit and other customers get another one, because that'll set you up for some problems later. And document everything, your communications with your customers, as much as possible. Verbal is not generally enough. You want to document things. So if you have a conversation with a customer, follow it up with some sort of written letter form, email, whatever your utility uses. Follow that up in writing so that it's not going to be questioned as to what you said. Shadi, I think you probably have a few more that you want to mention there.
Well, just one hiccup is that you might be taking on too much too quickly and trying to provide too many. Start off with simple. Start off with, we're going to work with customers and create individualized plans to address their needs. If it's a very small system, that might be all you need to do. But if you want to add some more, then start off small, have something available, and then build. There's no expiration date to this. You can create more and more programs going forward. It doesn't even have to be related to COVID. You could keep adding more options to help customers in general. And then just make sure that you're consistent with your application processes, so that you're not telling somebody, when you're working especially with individualized programs, that you're not telling one customer one thing and then another customer another thing, and it looks like there's some kind of discrimination that's happening. So make sure there's some parameters, even when you're doing individualized programs, there are some parameters that work for everybody. So maybe having a minimum number of months that you would offer in a payment plan, and maybe a maximum too, and then maybe even have a starting point. So you always contact the customer, say, how about a 12-month payment plan? Would that work for you? And then get people to sign up for 12 months. And if that doesn't work, then you would customize. But try to not standardize, but try to provide the same kind of consistent level of service to all customers and avoid inconsistencies in application of your program. So just be careful of that. And then have them sign a contract, have them understand what the consequences are, like how long do they have to pay, how much do they have to pay every month, and then what happens if they miss a payment. They need to know this, they need to have it in writing, so that if you do cut off a customer going forward, you've got it documented, that you've already communicated with them, they've already signed off on that plan. So make sure that they fully understand what they're getting themselves into. And then not communicating enough is always going to be the biggest challenge, I think, and the biggest hiccup. You need to make sure that you're spreading that message across the board very quickly and as loudly as possible to get people to.
And I think a follow-up thing that some people had asked separately a question about is what happens when a customer won't accept the help. And even prior to the pandemic, we would see utilities that set up customer assistance programs, and they would have people not apply for them. So that's gonna happen. Like, even if you set up programs and a person is eligible and you think that they should take advantage of it, there are still going to be customers that for whatever reason won't do it. So you kind of have to get prepared for that and prepare what you plan on doing if that's the case. And again, documenting that you made the offers available and that, you know, they were made aware of it. So just keep that in mind. There will always be people who won't take advantage of the program, even if you set it up.
Thank you. So I'll just appreciate everybody's questions. We've answered most of them. We haven't gotten to everyone, and we'll try to follow up with other folks. And if you have some more questions, or if you think of more questions later going on forward, feel free to contact us. Here's our website. I'll just kind of go through some of the resources that are available for small water systems in dealing both with COVID as well as other things. But we've got some resources that you can, they're all listed on this website, ufcnetwork.org. We have a bunch of tools that you could use for financial projection and planning, including tools that allow you to look at your revenues and your expenses and help you design appropriate rates to cover all of your costs, as well as your capital projects. We've got tools that allow you to assess the financial health of your system, tools that allow you to assess the affordability of your residential rates. And then the last one is one I mentioned yesterday, a tool that allows you to estimate how much financial assistance you need to provide to fully fund a bill paying customer assistance program to help customers deal with paying off their bills. There's a spread, this is the dashboard that I mentioned earlier today, that you can go on the website and put in just a little bit of information, what your revenues are, how much you're losing in revenues because of COVID, what your reserves are, and it will estimate how long you continue to operate your system and to pay for debt service as well as your operations and maintenance costs. So it's a very simple dashboard, and it gives you a little bit either peace of mind to know that you'll be fine for a little bit, or it will let you know that you need to start doing something about your revenues or lost revenues to make sure that you're financially solvent going forward. We have this tool that we can work with you one-on-one, kind of doing the 12 to 24 month projections on your revenue losses going forward, and we work with you one-on-one on that one. This is not one that you can download directly. I'll skip these. And then the last one is, well, we've got some summaries on all the different funding programs that's available for the state of Washington and all the small water systems, as well as other systems too, but all the funding programs are available to provide grants or loans, low interest loans to water systems for infrastructure projects. So you would go for that one, you would go to our website, ufcnetwork.org, click on resources and then funding sources by state, and then click on Washington, and you'll come up with this PDF that you can download. It's a very, if you're not familiar with all the funding programs, this is a really easy snapshot of all the programs with the contact information and websites you can browse. And then the last thing is we provide free assistance to water systems below 10,000 people covered by the EPA cooperative agreements. And I'm going to ask right now if anybody here works for a water system, small water system that's below 10,000 people, and that you would like some kind of assistance, either some more advice, you want to ask your questions, we answer some more questions, or you want us to work with one of these tools that we just talked about, some of the revenue loss projections, or looking for, some estimate of how long you can continue to operate, or just other kind of things like looking for some help in developing customer assistance programs. We can work with you one-on-one at no cost to you, but we just want to see if you are interested, you just say yes to one of these questions and we'll follow up. Unfortunately, this is kind of limited towards only systems below 10,000 people, and our resources are limited, so we can't really help too many more above that threshold. But you can always email us, and we'll try to answer quick questions if you're a larger system and looking for some assistance, or to know about the resources as well. So thank you. I'm going to stop this poll. And then last is I'm just going to show you our contact information. So thank you everybody for your time and your attention and for all the questions you've submitted. Really great
and
question.
One quick reminder, Shadi, just to remind you again that if you're an operator, And you're wanting CEUs, make sure that you put in the chat box a private chat to Allison Perch, and we believe it's set up for a private chat, so you should be able to do that pretty easily. Just put in your operator number so that we can make sure that you get your CEU. So if you haven't already done that from the first announcement we made, please do that before you sign off, and Allison will get that, and we'll be able to make sure that you get your full CEUs for attending.
Thank you. That's a great point. And we'll keep the webinar on for a few more minutes after, you guys can leave once you're done, but we'll keep it on just so that people have time to submit that. And then we will have the recordings of these 2 sessions along with one PowerPoint slide deck that combines both up on the website. We already have the PDF of the slides up on the website, but we'll send you an email with a link to access both of these recordings as well as the PDF, and you'll have our contact information there. So we have a lot of links in these PDFs. I would suggest downloading them in case you're looking for the shortcuts and not having to search for them. But at this point, thank you everybody for your time and your attention, and thank you for all the service you're providing all your customers, especially during these very difficult times. We know there's a lot and you have a lot of work, and it's challenging, especially when your revenues are dropping as well and you're having to deal with all these new policies and new conditions and a new normal that we're operating in. So we appreciate it. I think everybody who works in this industry understands it and appreciates it. I think your customers appreciate it, whether or not they will tell you they appreciate it. I think everybody appreciates having access to water, especially when they're staying at home and trying to be safe.
Yeah, we often say that the water utilities are sort of the unsung heroes that, we all know about the public health professionals and the emergency, medical workers who help people, but we're forgetting that the water utilities are a really, really essential service. So, just to add my thanks to Shadi's, that it's really, really important that we all remember the essential nature of water and wastewater operators at this time, and thank you for all you do.